Hey, my name is Daniel Hall, and today I'm going to be talking about creativity and the creative process. So I'm an associate professor and the director of the counselor education program here at the University of Lynchburg. So we have a program that offers degrees in school counseling as well as clinical mental health counseling. Creativity is a topic I've been fascinated by for a while now. Most people don't identify themselves as creative, and I started to wonder why. And what we know about creativity from a kind of a science evidence-based perspective is that we all have the capacity to be creative. Creativity isn't just about art. And so often when we think about creativity, we are associating it with professions or art forms that we consider creative, but it's so much broader than that. Creativity is simply the idea of bringing new ideas, new concepts into reality in any discipline, any field. And so when we think about creativity from that angle, it becomes really practical and it becomes really useful to think about how do we develop the knowledge and skills to be more creative in our work. We actually know a lot about creativity. We know a lot of the traits that creative individuals have. We know a lot of the characteristics that creative teams have. And then we also know a lot about the creative process itself. Some of the things we know about people who are regularly creative within their field, within their work, is that they have things like what we call a T-shaped knowledge base. These individuals know a little about a lot and a lot about a little. So they have some level of expertise in 1, 2, maybe 3 fields. And so there's a deep set of knowledge that they can draw upon, but they also know a little about a lot, meaning that they have some knowledge of a range of topics or disciplines. And why that's important for creativity is that most of creativity is simply about connecting dots between given disciplines. We also know that creative individuals take risks on a regular basis. Creative individuals find ways to take thoughtful risk, to try new things, to experiment, and to iterate a lot more than non-creative individuals do. Creativity always comes with a level of risk. You can't innovate without risk being part of what you're doing. We also know creative individuals get into what we call a state of flow pretty regularly, and there's a lot of research on states of flow, and what it is basically when someone gets so immersed in their work that everything else kind of fades away. And we've probably all had this happen with some activity in our lives where we are engaged in it, and 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours passes by, and we look up and we don't realize what has happened with time. And creative individuals regularly get into that state when they're working, because we know that state engages the creative part of the brain more than if we're in a kind of a distracted, trying to multitask state, which, in a very distracted world is the way a lot of us work. We have an email tab open, or we have our phone sitting on our desk with the notifications on, and all those things are really good at distracting us from getting into a flow state. Those are some of the things we know about creative individuals. What we know about creative teams or organizations is that they're highly collaborative, and so creative teams are almost always working in an interdisciplinary way. Creativity is almost always a combination of disciplines or ideas from different fields. And so creative teams intentionally work in a very collaborative, interdisciplinary way. They also have very open boundaries. Most organizations of a decent size are going to have some sort of division amongst responsibilities. So you may have things like a marketing department, an accounting department, and that in and of itself is fine. What creative organizations do well is when they have those kinds of divisions is that they make sure that the boundaries between them are very open. And what that allows is a lot of collaboration, a lot of interdisciplinary communication. People are accessible to each other, they can collaborate, they can hear about another discipline or pull ideas from each other on a regular basis in a very open way. We also know that creative organizations brainstorm effectively Brainstorming is about idea generation. It really is about figuring out what problem are we trying to solve, and then coming up with an abundance of ideas. And what happens a lot of times in teams is that you'll have an identified problem. You may come up with 1 or 2, maybe 3 ideas that are kind of put on the table, and then everybody jumps on one and you start moving forward with it immediately. Sometimes it's just practical to do that, but other times you really don't want to just jump on an idea and run with it, because that may not be the best idea. There's a lot of research that shows volume of ideas, volumes of concepts is really critical to generating creative or innovative ideas, products, and processes. We also know that creative teams incentivize creativity. Organizations that regularly embrace failure on the part of their employees, thoughtful failure, but regularly embrace failure and especially do not punish failure, are ones that are fostering an environment where their employees feel safe to be creative. And if people aren't feeling like they can be risk takers, if they can't try something new, then they are not going to, and innovation is not going to happen. Another thing we know about creativity, in addition to kind of the traits and characteristics of individuals and teams, is the creative process itself. And I think this is one of the most helpful pieces of information I've ever come across when it comes to creativity and innovation, is that creativity isn't this kind of mystical process that some people are able to do and some people aren't. It's not necessarily a talent. People may have predispositions for it, but it is a process that we can very deliberately engage to enhance our own creativity. And it's also a set of skills that, like any skills in life, we can practice on a regular basis and get better at. One of the models that I really like on the creative process was developed by a guy named Keith Sawyer. And the model has 8 kind of distinct stages in it. And each stage also has some very deliberate practices you can engage in. The first stage is ask, and ask is all about question finding and problem finding. So this is about digging into the problem. We want to take the problem, an identified problem, and really tease it apart. Very often, when you look at major innovations in about any industry, the problem that the innovation has solved is usually not the problem that the company or the individual set out to fix. And what that indicates is that the initial problem is usually not the best one or the one we should be solving. And taking a lot of time at the beginning to ask a lot of questions and to really dig into the problem, look at the problem from different angles so that we are understanding what the problem is and what the potential path of a solution might be, is really critical. So we need to start any kind of creative process by asking a lot of questions and really digging into whatever kind of the presenting problem is that we're going to be trying to solve. Another phase of the creative process is to learn. And so once we have an identified problem, an identified issue, an identified question that we're trying to solve, we need to figure out what we know and what we don't know about it. And so this is a process of going out into the world, looking at the research, reading, talking to people, looking at other industries to see what other people are doing around the problem. It really is this information gathering process. But when you have a very targeted question, then your learning is also very targeted. And so once we have a good question, we need to figure out what we do and don't know, and that is what we do in the learning stage of the creative process. Well, another part of the creative process is what we call looking. And this is all about paying attention. There are a lot of things in our everyday lives that we just don't notice. And what we know about creative people and creative organizations is they pay very close attention to a lot of things that other people are ignoring. So this could be noticing things in a process, this could be noticing things in a product, this could be noticing things in nature or in the way people are interacting, but it's a very intentional observational method to make sure that we are being very mindful about paying attention to the world around us and how our environments and how interactions are shaping the problem that we're trying to solve. The next stage of the creative process is called play, and this is the fun one. This is about not working. Play demonstrates that not working, actively doing things that we enjoy outside of work, being playful, having hobbies, traveling, those kinds of things actually really enhance our creative abilities. If we stick on a problem and we do nothing else but work and think about that problem, we're actually hindering our creative abilities. And so playing, taking time off of work, having a healthy balance in life, doing things that we enjoy that are non-work related, actually helps creativity. And the neuroscience around this is really interesting, that there are parts of our brain that will continue to work on whatever problem we're trying to solve when we're not thinking about it. This is why if you've ever been engaged in like a mundane task, like mowing or taking a shower, and you've had a kind of a creative spark or an idea about a problem that you're working on, that's what's happening. It's our brains are continuing to work behind the scenes on the issues that we are trying to solve in our work, but those parts of our brain don't get activated unless we stop working. The next stage in the creative process is what we call think. Think is about generating ideas. And idea generation, as I mentioned when we talked about brainstorming, is really critical, and it's about volume. And so thinking is about coming up with as many ideas as you can. So there's a big difference between divergent thinking and convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is highly correlated with creativity, and that is being able to think of solutions that are kind of wild and outrageous. Those can easily be dismissed if you are in a organization where convergent thinking is the norm, which means like an idea is presented on the table and everybody starts thinking of that as the appropriate idea. We're no longer thinking of alternatives. Those wild ideas, the ones that on the surface may seem like they have no feasibility or no practicality to solve the issue we're trying to solve, might actually have components that could be pulled and applied to the problem. So maybe the whole idea isn't what we're going to move forward, but maybe little bits and pieces of it can help us think about the solution differently. Another stage is called fuse. And this is about very intentionally bringing divergent ideas together. And we see this in a lot of different industries where people have taken a concept from one field or one discipline or one industry and have applied it to their own industry, and all of a sudden we have a new product or a new process that people are now engaged in. So fuse is about thinking about your problem differently by combining it with another idea. So some of this could be like metaphorical thinking or analogous thinking. The idea is that we have to start combining. We have to be fusing our idea with other ideas to see what comes out of it. Another stage of the creative process is what we call choose. And this is about choosing. This is about making a decision and beginning to move things forward. This doesn't mean we're not going to iterate and we're not going to evolve an idea as it moves forward, but at some point in a creative process, you have to bring an idea to life. And so choosing is a very deliberate process of looking at the options. And choose is about being very intentional about sifting through those to find the one or two ideas that we're going to experiment with. But the creative process can get stalled if at some point we're not intentionally being very decisive. And the last stage of the creative process is what we call make, which is to physically represent your solution or your problem. And so this could be like a model you build, this could be a sketch that you build. Even if it's a conceptual idea that we're going to be putting into practice, creating some kind of physical form just helps us think about it a little differently. And it's also fun because you can use Legos, you can use blocks, you can use scrap materials that you have. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Doing that or sketching things, writing things out, but we want to come up with some kind of physical representation of the problem that we're trying to solve so that we can manipulate it, we can look at it, we can see it from different angles and conceptualize it in a new way. So it's important to emphasize that the stages of the creative process are not linear. Keith Sawyer, who has done a tremendous amount of research on creativity, calls it zigzag. It's this idea that, definitively moving from like a stage to a stage to a stage and going through the stages linearly, but we are actively kind of jumping from stage to stage based on where we are in our creative process. And so you may do the ask stage, you may do a lot of problem identification at the beginning, you may do some learning, you may make a model of what you've learned, and then that may lead you to some new questions and you go back to the ask stage. It really is about understanding where you are in the creative process and then figuring out which stage is going to be most helpful next. My big takeaways from researching the creative process is that it is something that we can intentionally and very deliberately engage. We can build skill in, we can build knowledge of. And I think that's what's most important to me about this work, is that we demystify the creative process. It's not something that is only for a talented few. It is something that any of us can engage in our work. It makes our work more fun, it makes it more interesting, it makes it less mundane, and it also allows us to be successful because we know that individuals and teams and organizations that are regularly creative, that have the ability to innovate, are the ones that last. They stay around. And so I think it's a process that we all need to be thinking about in our work, and we all need to engage in our practice.